Alien survivor reveals the horrors of the human war front. They have asked me the same question 4 times now. What happened to the rest of your team? 4 times. Same room, same table, same recording device, same question. And each time I give them the same answer and they write it down, and they pause, and then they ask it again, as if the repetition will eventually produce a different result. I understand the impulse. The answer I keep giving does not fit inside the framework they have built their entire careers around, and it is much easier to assume the answer is wrong than to consider that the framework might be. The answer is not wrong. 6 Arveth tactical operatives entered Waypoint 11 on the morning of the 14th cycle. I am the only one who came back out. That is not a number that requires interpretation or clarification. It is simply the number. 6 went in. 1 came out. I came out because I ran. I want to say that clearly before anything else in this account, because I have spent the time between that morning and this room constructing other explanations, and all of them are technically true, and none of them are the actual truth. The actual truth is that I ran, and the reason I ran is that I had watched my team taken one by people who had no formal military training, no tactical doctrine, no equipment advantage, and no apparent interest in the mathematics of the situation they were in, and I was afraid. For the first time in 11 years of active operations, I was genuinely, completely afraid. Not of dying. I want to be precise about this because the distinction matters. I have operated under lethal conditions many times, and the prospect of dying in the field is not a new variable for me. What I was afraid of was what the people inside that station represented, what they were willing to do, what they had already decided before we arrived. I did not have a category for it. I will try to build one now. The Arveth Compact had been mapping expansion routes through the contested transit corridor for 14 years. Waypoint 11 was listed in our system catalog as a human commercial transit station, a refueling and maintenance waypoint for trade vessels moving through the outer relay system. The intelligence file designated it as civilian staffing, 12 to 20 personnel, primarily operational and maintenance workers, no military designation, no registered armaments, no tactical significance beyond its position at the junction of 3 transit lanes. That position was the reason we were sent. The mission was a standard designation acquisition. Enter the station, secure the operational systems, confirm human evacuation or surrender, and establish Arveth Compact control of the junction. The Compact had been doing this in the outer relay system for 8 years. It was a reliable process. Civilian installations did not resist. They had no training for it, and no real capacity for it, and they understood, in the practical way that civilians tend to understand things, that resistance against a trained tactical team was not a calculation that produced useful outcomes. 6 operatives was more than the mission required. My senior commander Drev had assigned 6 partly as a margin of caution and partly because the junction location made Waypoint 11 strategically significant enough to justify thorough clearing. We expected to be on the station for 2 cycles, maximum, document the infrastructure, secure the systems, and leave a holding team. My team was Petra, Miles, Gareth, Delia, and Rowan. Petra was my senior recon operative. She had been in the field longer than any of us except me, and she had developed, over the course of that service, a particular quality of observation that went beyond what the equipment produced. She noticed things before the scanner confirmed them. She had a way of standing at the edge of a space and reading it the way some people read text, quickly and completely and without apparent effort. I trusted her read on a room before I trusted anything else. Miles handled communications and was methodical about it in the specific way that makes methodical look like a positive quality rather than a limitation. He was thorough, he was reliable, and he understood that the communications operative is only as useful as the signal they maintain, so he treated every signal as if losing it would be catastrophic, which, as it turned out, was the correct approach. Gareth was our combat lead. He was large and fast and efficient, and he had a particular patience about him that good combat operatives often have, the ability to wait without telegraphing the wait, to be still without being absent. He was the person I put at the front when I did not know what was on the other side of something. Delia managed technical operations, station systems, power grids, security overrides. She could read a station's architecture from its power consumption pattern, and she could tell within 4 minutes of entry whether a station had been modified from its original configuration. This would matter enormously. I did not know that yet. And Rowan. Rowan had been operational for 8 months. This was the 11th mission, young enough that the edge of it still showed, not in lack of competence but in a particular alertness that I had seen in operatives at that stage, the kind that has not yet decided what is worth paying sustained attention to because everything still seems worth it. He prepared carefully. He checked his equipment twice before every deployment. He asked good questions. He was very good at asking questions. I want to give command the context of this mission, because context is the thing the mission report leaves out, and the thing I cannot leave out if this account is going to mean anything. The Arveth Compact had been operating in the Outer Relay Transit Corridor for 8 years. 8 years of steady, methodical designation acquisition across a string of commercial and research installations, the kind of work that does not make records but produces results. In 8 years, we had secured 11 installations, 0 casualties on our side across all 11. The process was: arrive, present the compact's terms, wait for civilian compliance, establish control. Civilian installations complied, not enthusiastically, not without grievance, but they complied, because the alternative to compliance was engagement with trained tactical operatives, and the people who ran commercial transit stations and research outposts understood what that math produced. The intelligence division gave us an average of 14 pages per target installation. Waypoint 11 received a file of 19 pages, slightly longer than average because of the junction location and its transit lane significance. Of those 19 pages, 12 were infrastructure documentation, power grid specifications, docking bay configuration, atmospheric system layout, structural load ratings. The remaining 7 pages covered personnel and operational status. 7 pages for the people inside. I read all 7 on the transport. The designation of civilian, non-military, no tactical capacity appeared in the first paragraph of the personnel section and was never revisited or qualified in the remaining 6.5 pages. It appeared the way a certainty appears in a document, stated once, foundational, not requiring support. 12 to 20 personnel, operational and maintenance workers, no dependents registered in the installation's public filings. No dependents. I have thought about that phrase many times since the station. Not because it was a lie. The station's public filings did not register dependents, because whoever built those public filings had either chosen not to register them or had done so in a way that our file construction process did not detect. And in either case, the result was the same: a 7-page personnel section that described the installation as staffed by operational workers and did not mention the 73 people who lived there, including the children whose drawings were on the wall of the schoolroom, including the elderly, including the person that Cora was treating in the corridor when I walked past her for the last time. 7 pages. I filed those pages in the operational brief section of my team preparation and did not return to them after the transport cleared the outer relay approach zone. The transport docked at waypoint 11 at the scheduled time, with no deviation and no indication from the station's external systems that anything was wrong. The docking alert registered, the airlock confirmed the seal, the station's welcome system offered a standard automated greeting to all arriving vessels. Gareth went in first, because Gareth always went in first. This was not a policy or a formal designation. It was simply the way things worked when Gareth was on the team, because Gareth had a particular quality at thresholds, at the moment before a new space opens, that I had never seen replicated in another operative. He did not rush. He did not hesitate. He moved through doorways and airlocks with the specific, unhurried purpose of someone who has decided that whatever is on the other side is simply the next thing to be dealt with, and dealing with it is the job, and the job begins now. He went in. Delia followed, then Miles, then Rowan, then Petra, then me. The corridor inside the airlock was lit and operational at full standard levels. Air pressure correct, temperature correct, Atmospheric composition correct. The station's systems were running at full active capacity, which for this time cycle meant fully occupied operations. All systems functional, all sections powered. The automated welcome system had offered the standard arrival greeting to our transport during approach, and nothing in the external sensor data during the approach had indicated anything other than a standard civilian transit station in normal operation. This was all consistent with the intelligence file. The silence was not consistent with anything. Not absence of sound silence, the other kind, the kind that a space makes when the people inside it have stopped making noise. A commercial transit installation with 12 to 20 operational staff running full active systems at this time cycle should have had ambient sound, footsteps in functional corridors, the background human activity of people doing their work, voices, the particular quality of inhabited space that has nothing to do with the systems running and everything to do with the people using them. There was none of that. The systems were running. The people were silent. Petra stepped into the corridor behind Gareth and stood still for a moment, with the particular quality she had when she was reading a room. She looked back at me. Her expression said, "This is wrong." I gave the order to advance. Not because the silence was explainable, not because the intelligence file had prepared me for it. Because we were 6 operatives against 12 to 20 civilians on a commercial transit station, and the mission was the mission, and I had 11 years and 0 losses, and the numbers said this was manageable. Gareth took the first junction corridor. He came back in 40 seconds with an expression I had never seen on his face before. I had worked with Gareth for 6 years. I knew his expressions the way you know the expressions of someone who has been beside you in enough situations that their face becomes a secondary instrument. Gareth's expression in that moment was not the expression of a person who had found something consistent with the mission brief. He said, "The corridor has been modified." And that was where it actually started. Not when we first saw the humans in the tree line of the primary zone, because there was no tree line. Not with the silence of the birds, because there were no birds here. Those were the details of a different mission that I was reading about in a debrief summary in the transport during the approach and filing under what can happen. What started here was different, quieter, in some ways, more specific. Gareth standing at the junction with the particular expression of a person who has found something that does not belong in the category the intelligence said it would be in, and the corridor behind him with its furniture and its modified panels and its uneven lighting, and the station around us with its silence and its full active systems, and 73 people somewhere inside it who had been waiting for the airlock to open. That was where it started. The modifications Gareth had found were not complex. They were not technically sophisticated. They were the kind of modifications made by people who understood the space they lived in well enough to change how it could be used by someone who did not know it. Furniture from the station's common areas had been positioned at the first corridor junction, not blocking it entirely, but narrowing it, creating a forced single-file approach that eliminated the formation advantage of a tactical team. Panels on the right wall had been removed, and the conduit access channels behind them were now open, creating lateral movement options for anyone who knew the station's internal layout well enough to use them. The overhead lighting in the first 2 corridor sections had been modified, some panels removed, some redirected, producing uneven lighting that would affect visual targeting more than it would affect someone familiar with the space. None of this required military training. It required knowing the station. Delia ran the power consumption analysis she always ran on entry and came to me in 90 seconds with her findings. The station had been drawing irregular power to 3 areas: the medical bay, the residential sector, and a junction point that was not on the station's registered layout. The power draws had been ongoing for some time, long enough that the patterns were established and consistent. Not emergency use, regular use. Someone had been running systems from those 3 areas for weeks, possibly months. I looked at the modified corridor again. This preparation had not been done in the few hours since our transport approached. This preparation had been done well in advance, which meant it had been done before we announced our approach, which meant It had been done in anticipation of an approach that had not yet been announced. They had been expecting someone, not us specifically, someone like us. Miles had established his relay connection with our transport and with Compact Command, and he reported it stable. I told him to maintain it at maximum priority. He said he already was, because Miles already was. Rowan was standing at the entrance to the modified corridor, looking at the furniture barricade with an expression I recognized as the expression of someone who is running calculations and not liking the outputs. He turned and asked me the question quietly. How long have they had to prepare this? I told him I did not know yet. He nodded and did not say what he was thinking. He had good instincts about when to keep a thought to himself. We advanced in tight formation. Gareth on point, Petra on the left wall, Rowan and Miles mid-formation, Delia scanning, me at the rear reading everything at once the way you read everything when the intelligence file has already been wrong about the most important details. The first human we saw was in the corridor past the barricade. She was standing in the corridor, not hiding, not running, standing, with both hands visible, in the posture of someone who has had a conversation with themselves about this moment and has arrived at a settled position regarding it. She was wearing a maintenance worker's uniform. The sleeves were rolled above her elbows. There was grease or machine oil on her forearms and her left hand. She was not young, but she was not old. She was a person who had been working on machines for a long time and showed it in the practical, unsentimental way of someone for whom machines are not complicated, only specific. Her name was Faye. I did not know that then. I learned it afterward, the way I learned most of what I know about the people inside that station, after the fact, from sources that were not available to me at the time, in the quiet hours when the information arrived, but the ability to use it was gone. She looked at our team. She looked at Gareth, who was almost twice her size and carrying equipment that had no civilian equivalent on any planet in the transit corridor. Her expression did not change. Gareth spoke. He told her the station was being placed under compact control and that all personnel were required to gather at the main docking bay for processing. She said no. One word, without aggression, without fear, without the particular quality that people who are performing bravery have when they are actually afraid. She said no, the way you say no to a factual inaccuracy. The way you say no when someone has proposed something that is simply not going to happen and you want to be efficient about communicating this. Gareth looked at me. I told him to proceed. I want command to understand what happened in the following 11 minutes in the way that matters for this account, which is not the tactical sequence, but the character of the situation we had entered. The tactical sequence is in the report. What matters here is this. Faye was a maintenance worker. She had no tactical training, no weapon training, no formal knowledge of engagement doctrine or effective defensive positioning. What she had was a complete and detailed understanding of every conduit, every access panel, every junction and lighting position and pressure valve in a station she had been maintaining for years. She had the station, not as a building she worked in, as a space she knew the same way you know the inside of your own living quarters, in the dark, without thinking, with the particular ease of a space that is yours. She used the lateral conduit access Delia had flagged on the initial scan. She used the uneven lighting she had created. She moved between sections that were not connected by any corridor the station's registered layout showed, because Faye knew the maintenance pathways behind the registered layout the way most people do not know any space at all. She was not a soldier. She was someone who had decided she was not leaving her home. Those are not the same thing. But in that corridor, with Faye moving through it like someone who owned the walls, the difference was almost impossible to find. Miles took a hit at the 7-minute mark. The conduit access on the left wall, which we had not fully cleared, which Delia had been in the process of clearing when the contact began. Miles went down, was up in 4 seconds, confirmed relay connection maintained, and kept moving. Maintained the relay connection while hit, while recovering, while repositioning. I marked that in the moment, and I will mark it again here. Miles maintained the connection. Rowan was at the corridor junction when Faye came through the overhead access panel. Not through a door, Through a panel in the ceiling of the junction corridor, a maintenance access that was not marked on any schematic, because maintenance accesses that size were too small to count as transit routes under the station's registered layout. She came through it, and she was fast, and Rowan was young and had good instincts, and his instincts were not fast enough. He went down in the junction corridor, near the modified barricade section, and when I reached him I counted 4 seconds, because counting is what my hands know to do when my mind does not know what else to do, and 4 seconds was what there was. Rowan was gone. I stood in that junction, and I looked at the overhead panel that Faye had come through, and I looked at the route she had taken back through it, and I looked at my team, Gareth, Petra, Miles, 4 people now, and I did not have a word for what was happening in the part of me that was not making tactical calculations. I did not have a column for it. I still do not. We extracted to the airlock junction to regroup. Gareth said nothing. Petra said nothing. Miles had the relay connection active and was reporting our position to command, his voice steady and technical and completely removed from anything other than the information itself, which was the only way Miles knew how to be in situations where being any other way would not help. Delia said what none of us wanted to say. She had good instincts about when to say the thing that needed to be said, even when no one wanted it said. She knew exactly what she was doing. Not trained, knowing. They are not the same thing, and the difference between them is the thing I have been trying to explain to command since the transport left the station's scan range. Trained means taught by someone else with a system. Knowing means built by years of living in a specific place until the place becomes an extension of how you think. Faye was not trained, but she knew the station the way I know my own operational doctrine, automatically, without consulting a framework, as a set of capacities that are simply available because they have been there long enough to become part of thinking. We had walked into a space that one person knew completely, and we did not know at all. And she had been waiting for us inside that knowledge. I told the team we were going back in. 4 of us. 1 down. A station that had been modified and prepared and occupied by people who had decided they were not leaving. I gave the order, and I want command to note that I gave it because the mission was the mission, and at that point in my service, that was sufficient reason, and I was wrong, and I am saying I was wrong, in this debrief, because the record should be accurate. We went back in. The second entry was different from the first, in the specific way that every second pass through a contested space is different. We knew more, and it did not help as much as knowing more should help, because what we knew was that the people inside knew the station in a way we did not and could not, regardless of how many scans Delia ran or how carefully Petra read the walls. We moved tighter and slower. Gareth was reading the overhead panels as he moved now, every one of them, because the ceiling had proven to be a direction that contact could come from, and he was not going to allow that to happen a second time. Petra was scanning the lateral conduit accesses as we passed them, flagging each one as cleared or uncleared, maintaining a running map of what we had confirmed and what remained open. Delia was on systems, monitoring power draw in real time, watching for the kind of fluctuation that preceded a modification being activated. Miles was maintaining the relay, with the particular focus of a person who understands that the relay connection is the team's only remaining line to anything outside this station. The third level was quieter than the second. Not comfortable quiet. The other kind. The kind where the absence of contact does not mean the absence of people, only that the people have chosen a different posture. Delia's power draw readings showed consistent signatures throughout the level. Thermal, electrical, biological. The station was occupied. The third level was occupied. The occupants had simply chosen for their own reasons not to be in the corridors we were moving through. Gareth found the human in the maintenance access corridor near the power relay junction on the third level. He was sitting with his back against the wall and his knees drawn up, both hands resting on them, completely visible. He was broad through the shoulders, in the way of someone who has been doing physical work for a long time. His station uniform was the kind that gets worn long enough to lose its original shape and acquire the shape of the person wearing it. He had a toolkit clipped to his belt, and he had not reached for it. He had the same quality of settled calm that Faye had. I understood, from standing in front of him, that this was not a coincidence. This was a characteristic. Something this community had in common, something in the water of this particular place, some quality produced by years of living at the edge of a transit corridor, with the understanding, maybe never fully stated, that the edge was where you were, and the edge was what you had, and you either made peace with that, or you left. They had made peace with it, and they had decided that peace and surrender were different things. His name was Brent. He gave it when Gareth asked, directly and without hesitation, the way you give your name when you have no reason to withhold it, because the name is not the information they are actually looking for. I asked him for the layout of the third level. He said nothing. I asked him for the positions of the remaining station personnel. He said nothing. I asked him for the location of the communications modification control point. He said nothing. I told him the station was being placed under compact control, and that his cooperation would be recorded in our formal report, and would have implications for how the station's residents were processed under the designation acquisition protocol. He looked at me with the expression of a person listening to something that is technically a sentence but is not really saying anything. He said nothing. I asked him about the children in the schoolroom. He held my attention for a moment. Then he said, "I know why you are asking me that." And then he said nothing else. I held him for 40 minutes. 15 questions in various forms. I tried the approach where you present incorrect information to see if accuracy provokes a correction. His response to incorrect information was the same expression he had used for everything else. The expression of a person who knows what is being done and has no interest in participating in it. He had decided before we came. The decision was complete and total and had no available surface for anything I was doing to find purchase on. I have read about this quality in historical accounts of resistance in adverse conditions. I had never encountered it as a field reality. I let him go. He walked to the junction at the end of the corridor and around it and was gone. I told the team we were advancing to the second level. Miles confirmed the relay was still active but degrading. Gareth checked his weapon. Petra ran the scan of the junction ahead. I counted the team. 4. I counted them again. 4. I had started doing this automatically, the way some people check a door they have already locked, not because the count would change, but because the act of counting was the way I confirmed that the number was real, that what I had was what I had and not something less. We had Rowan at 20 minutes in. That was the number the mission was running now. 4 of us now, moving differently, with the modification of people who have received information that changes the approach. Less formation, more individual awareness. Gareth still on point, but reading the walls and the ceiling and the floor, the way you read a space that has already demonstrated it can hurt you. Petra, on scan ahead, Delia on systems, Miles keeping signal, me holding the picture of all of it and trying to produce something coherent from the pieces. The station's second level was different from the first, not in the modification patterns, though those continued and intensified as we moved deeper, different in what the modifications were protecting. The residential section of Waypoint 11 was not listed in the intelligence file. This is an omission that I have raised formally with the Intelligence Division, and will not repeat here except to note it, because noting it is necessary for what follows. The intelligence file described a commercial transit station with operational staff quarters. What the station actually contained was a residential community. 73 people, not 12 to 20 operational staff, 73 people who lived there. The residential section occupied the station's second level and a portion of the third. It had been built up over time in the way that residential spaces develop when people stay in a place longer than they originally planned. Additions, conversions, spaces repurposed from their original function into something more personal. The operational staff quarters the intelligence file had mentioned were still there, still in use, but they were surrounded now by something that the intelligence file had not been designed to see or describe. It was a home, 73 people's home. The second level corridor had a different quality than the first level from the first step into it. The lighting was warmer, adjusted from the standard operational spectrum to something closer to what humans apparently find comfortable for sustained daily living. The walls had been painted in sections, not uniformly, in the particular way of a long-term communal space where individual character has accumulated across time. There were photographs mounted in a few of the doorways, images of people in places that were not this station, families and landscapes and occasions, the particular archive of a life that has more past than any single location can contain. I stood in that corridor, and I read those photographs the way you read evidence at a scene, when the evidence is telling you something you did not come equipped to hear. The schoolroom was the third door on the left side. I did not go in. I looked through the door that had been left open, which was the door of a room that was actively used on a regular schedule and had not been locked or sealed or closed when we came through the airlock, because either the people inside the station had not thought to close it or had decided that closing it was not something they were willing to do in the moment that their home was being entered. The curriculum board on the wall listed subjects and a weekly schedule. The assignment area still had work mounted on it, in various stages of completion, the kind of assignments that are returned and pinned up and left there while the next one begins. The drawings were mounted around the windows. There were drawings of the station, viewed from outside, from the angles available through the observation ports, done in the particular style of children who have spent a long time looking at something and know it well enough to get the proportions approximately right. Ships coming in to dock. The junction point of the 3 transit lanes, rendered in the simplified geometry of someone who understands what they are drawing even if they cannot yet draw it perfectly. There were drawings of space. Stars, placed with the care of someone who had been looking at those stars long enough to remember where they were. There were drawings of families, groups of people, identified by size and relative position rather than detail, with the names written underneath in the handwriting of children at different stages of development. None of the names were ones I recognized from the intelligence file. Because none of the people in those drawings were in the intelligence file. I counted the drawings I could see from the doorway, 14 visible. More on the wall I could not see from my position. 14 drawings left on the wall. Not taken down, not removed, left exactly where they had been put, by children who had put them there in the expectation that they would remain, because the space was theirs, and the expectation was reasonable in a place that had been home long enough for the expectation to feel permanent. Gareth was beside me. He looked at the drawings for approximately 3 seconds and then he looked at me, and his expression had something in it that I did not have a word for in our tactical vocabulary. He did not say anything. Gareth had never been a person who said things when he did not have the right words for them. Petra had moved ahead to the next corridor junction, and she called back, quietly, that she had found something. Delia was scanning the power draw. The irregular pull from the residential section that she had flagged on entry was coming from a specific point at the far end of the second level, a door that was sealed and showed no registered access on the station's system log. Power draw consistent with medical equipment. Atmospheric regulation running at slightly elevated temperature. The kind of environment maintained for people who cannot maintain their own. Miles reported his signal was degrading. Not critically, not yet, but the primary relay frequency was losing clarity in a way that was building rather than holding. He switched to a backup channel and the clarity improved, but the backup channel had lower range and he noted it. Someone inside the station knew our relay frequencies, or had guessed at them well enough to build a block that covered the primary range. Neither option was in the intelligence file's description of civilian non-military personnel with no tactical capacity. I ordered the advance toward the sealed door. We found Faye in the service corridor outside it. She had come through another maintenance access, a floor-level panel this time, small enough that it required moving in a way that most people could not do without training in confined space movement, which Faye could do because maintenance corridors are not built for comfort, and anyone who works in them regularly builds the capacity whether they intend to or not. She was standing in the corridor outside the sealed door with the specific stance of a person who is guarding something and is not going to be moved from the guarding. She had a utility tool in her right hand, not a weapon. the kind of heavy, multi-purpose tool that maintenance workers carry as a standard kit item. She was not raising it. She was holding it the way you hold a thing that is usually a tool and might, in a specific circumstance, need to be something else. I told her to step away from the door. She did not move. I told her what was behind the door was going to be found and cataloged regardless of her position in this corridor, and that her cooperation would be recorded in our formal report and would have implications for how the station's residents were processed. She looked at me with the same expression she had used in the first corridor. Not defiance, not fear. The settled expression of someone who has already finished having this conversation in her own head and knows exactly what she is going to do. She said, "You can go through me, or you can go around." Petra had been scanning the sealed door from a position along the wall. She looked at me, and her scan result was in her expression before she said it out loud. She said, "Medical equipment, 6 biological signatures, 2 signatures with significantly reduced vital indicators, at least 2 pediatric biological readings. 6 people behind the door who could not fight, could not run, could not do anything except be behind the door that Faye was standing in front of in a service corridor with a utility tool in her right hand, and 3,000 days of working in these walls written into the particular ease of how she was standing." Gareth said quietly, not as a question, "She built those modifications in the first corridor." She had. Of course she had. Who else in the station had the physical knowledge to do it? Who else had been in every conduit and every access panel and every overhead route? Who else had known exactly which lighting panels to modify and which floor panels would take a person's weight in descent and which corridor junction would produce the sight lines she needed? Faye had prepared the first corridor, and then she had come to stand outside this door. I ordered the team past the corridor to continue to the 3rd level. I did not engage with Faye a second time. I am giving command my reasoning, which is that the door she was guarding contained 6 people who could not fight, and taking the time and the contact to remove her from the corridor was a cost I did not have the operational resources to pay at that point in the mission. She had been correct. We went around, and the door stayed closed. I told the team to continue to the 3rd level. The junction between the 2nd and 3rd levels was a stairwell that the station's original design had not included and that had been constructed at some point after the station's original installation, built with the particular practical materials of people who have access to a maintenance supply inventory and enough understanding of structural requirements to make something functional, if not elegant. It had been used enough that the steps had worn smooth in the center. This stairwell was not on the station's registered layout. I noted this and did not say it out loud, because saying it out loud would not add anything useful to our current situation, and would add something useless, which was the articulation of a fact we were all already thinking about, which was that a station with residential capacity for 73 people and a home-built stairwell was not the installation the intelligence file had described, and had not been for a long time, and nobody in the compact's intelligence process had noticed and had not considered it relevant. Miles reported on the relay as we entered the 3rd level. The degradation was continuing. He was on his 2nd backup frequency. The primary block was comprehensive and had been extended since Delia's initial read, which meant someone inside the station was maintaining it actively, someone who knew our frequencies well enough to adjust the block as we switched channels. He was not certain how long he could maintain any relay connection to the transport. He said it with complete factual calm, the way Miles said everything. Then he went back to maintaining the connection. Delia was scanning the 3rd level power draws and building the map of the communications block control point. It was in the central hub. She had confirmed it from 3 separate triangulation points. She also confirmed that the central hub showed the highest biological signature density on the station, which meant that the communications block control point was in the most occupied section of the station, which was not an accident. The hub was the center of the station. It was where the residential sections converged. It was, from everything the signature density told us, where most of the 73 people were. The control point had been placed there not because the hub was the optimal technical location for it, but because the hub was the location that would require us to go through the most people to reach it. Every decision made in the preparation of this station had the same structure, not designed to stop us, designed to make every step cost more than the previous one. I understood this on the third level, standing in a home-built stairwell with worn steps, looking at Delia's scan map. I understood it the way you understand something that has been building at the edge of your awareness for hours and finally arrives at the center of it. They were not trying to win. They had known since before we arrived that winning against a trained tactical team was not the available outcome. They were trying to make every step expensive, every meter, every corridor, every contact, not to stop us, to make the accounting come out wrong, to be the kind of problem that, when command saw the numbers, produced a question: is this junction worth this? Faye in the first corridor had not been trying to stop our advance. She had been establishing a price. Brent in the maintenance corridor had not been trying to give us information. He had been establishing a price. The children's drawings on the wall, still there, still untouched. A price. What kind of force takes this from people who have made this their home? That was the question they had been building toward from the first modification in the first corridor. I stood in the stairwell with 3 operatives and no answer to the question, and gave the order to advance to the second level and the central hub. We passed the schoolroom door again on the descent. Still open. Gareth did not look at it. Petra did not look at it. Delia did not look at it. I looked at it because I could not stop looking at it, which was itself information about what was happening to the part of me that was not running the tactical assessment. The part that had started to understand, somewhere between Brent's silence and Faye's door and this room of drawings, that the thing I was inside was not the kind of thing the training had prepared me for. The training prepared me for opposition, for resistance, for calculation and counter-calculation in the field. The training did not prepare me for a room that had been built by people who intended to stay, and who had been preparing to ensure that they could stay, and who had done all of that preparation in the specific and total knowledge that what they were up against was not a rival community or a competing claim, but a compact with designation protocols and tactical operatives and the institutional weight of an organization that had been successfully acquiring transit corridor assets for 8 years. They knew who we were. They knew what we did. They had had months to understand exactly what walking through that airlock would mean. And they had stayed. They had drawn the pictures on the wall and stayed. They had built the stairwell and stayed. They had watched Faye install the ceiling panels in the first corridor and put the furniture at the junction and stayed. They had listened to Len plan what he was going to say to whoever came through the airlock and stayed. Not because leaving was impossible. The transport records showed that Waypoint 11 had outgoing vessel traffic that could have accommodated the population multiple times over. They could have left. At any point in the months of preparation, they could have packed the station into the available transport and gone somewhere the compact had not yet reached. They had stayed because it was theirs. That was the whole of it. That was the thing the intelligence file had not found and could not have found with the tools it used, because the tools it used looked for strategic assets and logistical significance and military capacity, and this was none of those things. This was 73 people who had found a place at the edge of a transit corridor and had decided it was theirs, and had decided, with the particular completeness of people who have made a decision they do not intend to revisit, that it would remain theirs. Delia said, "Hub entry in 40 meters." I came back to the corridor. I came back the way you come back to a room after thinking about something else entirely. The room is the same room it was, and so are you, and the distance traveled was internal, rather than physical, and nothing has changed except that you now know something you did not know when you left. What I knew was this: the people in that station had been asking a question since the first modification in the first corridor, and I had spent 4 hours answering the wrong question and had finally understood what the actual question was. Not whether they could stop us. They knew they could not stop us in the permanent sense. The question was, what kind of force does this? What kind of force walks into a home and takes it? What do you have to be to do that? I did not have an answer. I was not sure the answer existed in a form I could carry, and I gave the order to advance, because giving the order was the only thing left that I knew how to do, and we moved. We advanced. We reached the corridor junction outside the central hub at the beginning of the 4th hour since entry. 3 operatives. Not 4. Not 6. I counted us the way I had been counting everything since the first level. Gareth, Petra, myself. 3. Delia was gone since the 2nd level residential corridor. Not gone the way Rowan was gone, but removed from the operational picture in a way that amounted to the same thing for the purposes of what came next. Miles had been managing the relay since the 3rd level with a signal quality that he described to me, when I asked directly, as technically present. Not usable for contact, but present. A thread, not a connection. I looked at Gareth and Petra. Gareth was checking the hub entry corridor from the junction, reading sight lines, reading angles, doing the work his hands knew to do. His right side was still favoring, still compensating, and he was still not acknowledging it out loud. His face was the face he had when the work was the work, and the personal condition was irrelevant to the work and would continue to be irrelevant until the work was done. Petra had her scan active and was building the picture of the hub interior. Signatures: 6 dense, 3 moderate, 1 stationary at the control point location. She looked at me with the flat professional calm she had carried through every part of this mission. She had said very little since Rowan. Not from grief, I think, from the specific discipline of a person who has understood that the bandwidth required for grief and the bandwidth required for staying functional are the same bandwidth, and she needed the second one right now. I had the same understanding. I told them what we were doing and how we were doing it, and neither of them said anything in response because neither of them had anything to say that would change what we were doing, and they both knew it, and we had been operational long enough together that this was sufficient communication. Gareth nodded once. Petra checked her scan one more time. We moved. The man who came to the junction outside the central hub was not who I expected. He was not Faye, who had been our most direct contact. He was not the person I had assessed as the likely coordination center, based on the communication patterns Delia had mapped before we lost her. He was a middle-aged man in a station maintenance supervisor's uniform. He was not tall, he was not physically imposing. He had a face that looked like a face that had spent a long time solving practical problems. Not hard, not soft, just the particular expression of someone who has been fixing things for so long that problems have become primarily interesting rather than primarily concerning. His name was Len. He said, "I know you have lost contact with your command." He said, "I know you have 3 people left." He let those facts sit for a moment, not as threat, as shared information, so that we were both working from the same accurate understanding of the current situation. Then he said, "I am offering you a way out of this station. All 3 of you, through the docking bay, back to your transport. We will not follow. We will not pursue. You leave, and this ends now." He said it in the particular way of someone making a proposal that is fair and that they believe will be accepted because the fairness is visible and the alternative is visible, and both parties can see both things clearly. Not a plea, not a bargain weighted with desperation. An offer from a position of knowing exactly what the offer was worth and what refusing it would cost, made in the calm of someone who has already decided what he is prepared to do next and would simply prefer not to have to do it. He was right. The calculation said, accept, preserve the remaining operatives, report the intelligence failure, return with a properly scoped mission force. 3 diminished operatives with no relay contact against a station of 73 prepared defenders. The math was not close. I looked at him for a moment. Then I looked past him toward the central hub, which was where the mission objective was, which was where the control point was, which was where 6 cycles of compact expansion planning said we needed to be. I said, "I cannot accept that offer." He was quiet for a moment. He was looking at me with the expression of a person who had expected this answer and had had time to make peace with it, but still found it, on arrival, somewhat difficult to hear. Not surprised, not angry, just still, in the way of someone absorbing something they already knew was coming. He said, "I know." 2 words. Acknowledgement. He understood, without my explaining it, that the thing preventing me from accepting his offer was not the tactical calculation, but something that sat underneath the tactical calculation, the same kind of thing that had kept every person in this station in it, and would keep them in it regardless of what happened next. Prior decision. Already made. Not subject to revision by the situation currently in front of it. He understood me. I am not sure I deserved to be understood that well by someone whose home I had spent the past 4 hours trying to take. He walked back toward the central hub. He did not look back. I want command to understand what happened in the minutes after that conversation in the way that matters for this account, because the tactical report contains the sequence, and this account needs to contain something the sequence does not. Len had offered me the outcome the rational model was designed to select. I had been in the field for 11 years. I had been in situations with worse tactical inputs than 3 operatives and no relay contact, and I had made the correct assessment in those situations because the correct assessment was the one the rational model produced, and the rational model was what I had. The rational model said accept. I had the rational model. I did not accept. Not because I found a viable path to the mission objective. I did not find one. I found the opposite of one. I did not accept because I could not accept, because the mission was the mission, and I was the operative who completes the mission, and in 11 years the mission had always been completed, and I had no mechanism for being the operative who accepted terms from a maintenance supervisor and went home. I have sat with this in the 14 cycles since the station. I have sat with what it tells me about myself. And what it tells me is the same thing that standing in front of the children's drawings told me, and what watching Faye guard that door told me, and what Brent's silence told me, and what Len's 2 words told me. The deciding happens before the moment. The moment arrives and finds the decision already there. I advanced on the central hub. Gareth was taken in the side passage to the right of the hub entrance. He was the best combat operative I worked with across 11 years. He went down in that passage, and I kept moving, because keeping moving was the only thing left. I had Petra. We reached the hub entry corridor together. She was scanning with one hand, and managing with the other, and reporting in the minimum language of someone who has reduced everything to what is strictly necessary, and is not wasting any capacity on anything else. 6 signatures in the hub, 3 in the adjacent corridor, 1 stationary at the position of the control point. She looked at me. We went in. The hub was larger than the corridors. A central gathering space with 6 visible humans distributed through it, and the lateral corridors branching off on 3 sides, and the control point in the far left corner behind a secondary console that Delia had flagged on the scan as the block's active node. Gareth moved right. I moved left toward the control point. Petra held the entry. The 6 people in the hub were not all armed. 2 had station tools being used in the manner Faye had used hers, not weapons but not weapons. The others had positions that used the hub's furniture and equipment as cover in the specific way of people who had planned those positions in advance. Which they had. All of this had been planned in advance. I was beginning to understand that everything in this station had been planned in advance, and that the planning was not tactical in the military sense, but something older and more complete. The planning of people who know a space with total intimacy and have had months to consider every question of where to stand and what to use. Gareth moved through the right side of the hub with the speed and precision of someone who has trained for exactly this kind of close environment work, and he was working, and then he was not working, and I do not have better language for it than that. The right side of the hub contained a lateral corridor that the scan had shown as the 3 moderate signatures, and the moderate signatures were not moderate in the way moderate had meant in my prior 11 years of operations. I kept moving toward the control point. Petra was taken in the hub entry. 11 seconds. Not a long time. Long enough. Then I was in the hub alone, and the control point was in front of me, and I stood in front of it for 4 seconds. I turned around. Not because the mission had changed. The objective was in front of me. I could have reached it. I turned around because 4 seconds in front of that control point, alone, with 11 years of operation and 0 prior losses and 5 people gone in a single mission, something finished. The something that finished was the same thing that had kept me moving forward, past every point where the rational model said stop. It had kept me past the 2-minute silence at 1 kilometer from the airlock, past Rowan in the second corridor junction, past the residential level with its 14 visible drawings and its worn stairwell and its schoolroom door left open, past Brent's complete and total silence, past Faye at the door to the medical bay, past Len saying I know, past Gareth going down on the right side of the hub. It had kept me moving because the mission was the mission, and I was the operative who completed missions, and in 11 years I had not been any other kind of operative. And then it finished. Not with a crisis, not with a moment of decision, it simply finished, the way a conversation finishes when everything has been said. I stood in front of the control point, and it was the same control point it had been for the past 4 seconds, and I was the same operative I had been for 11 years, and the mission was the same mission it had been since the transport docked at waypoint 11. And none of it moved me. I turned around and I ran. I want to be precise about what running felt like in that moment, because I have been asked about it in the debrief sessions, and I have not given a satisfactory answer. And the reason I have not given a satisfactory answer is that the feeling did not have a satisfactory category available to it. It was not shame and it was not relief, and it was not the particular hollow quality of failure, though it contained elements of all of these. It was something more specific, the feeling of a person who has been maintaining a position for a long time and has finally set it down, and discovers that setting it down is both correct and permanent, and that what the position weighed will only become clear now that it is no longer being carried. I ran through the hub entry where Petra had been, down the second-level corridor with the schoolroom door still open, past the worn stairwell, down to the first level, past the modified junction with the furniture that Faye had positioned, to the airlock, through it, down the docking arm, into the transport. The last person I saw was Cora. She was sitting on the floor of the corridor outside the sealed medical bay door. The person in front of her was in a state that I assessed, from a distance of approximately 8 meters at a running pace, as serious. She was working on him with the full attention and complete calm of someone for whom medical work is both a professional skill and a fundamental disposition, a doctor in the way that the word means more than a job title. I could see it in how her hands moved. Not careful in the way of someone being careful, but certain in the way of someone who has done this enough times that the certainty has become part of the hands themselves. She did not look up when my footsteps entered her hearing range. She did not look up when my shadow crossed the corridor light. She did not look up when an armed Arveth operative running from the direction of recent contact passed within 8 meters of her and the person she was treating. She looked up once, after I had passed, at me, for approximately 3 seconds. Her expression was the expression I had been seeing since the airlock. Settled. Prior decision, already in place, not subject to revision by current conditions. Not afraid of me, not asking me for anything, not performing anything. The expression of someone who knows what she is doing and is doing it, and the operative running past is a fact and not a variable. She looked back down at the person she was treating. Her name was Cora. I know that now. I reached the docking bay. I boarded the transport. I left. And Cora was still in the corridor, and the door she had been guarding was still closed, and the station was still theirs. I want to tell Command precisely what the following 14 hours were. They were not rest. They were not recovery. They were not the structured debrief preparation that protocol recommends for operatives returning from high-casualty situations. They were 14 hours of sitting in the transport medical bay in full silence, which is a thing I am told I have never done in 11 years of active operation, and I believe it because I had never before had reason to. I sat with the mission report recorder on the surface beside me, and I did not activate it. I watched the transit station fall behind the transport on the external feed, and I watched it until the screen range limit dropped it from view, and then I sat with the blank screen. I did not sleep. I did not run the standard post-mission equipment audit. I sat and I tried to build a category for what I had just experienced, and I kept arriving at the same failure point, which was that the category required a column that the assessment framework did not contain. The intelligence file said 12 to 20 non-military personnel. No armaments, no tactical training, no defensive capacity. Every word of that was technically accurate and completely useless. 12 to 20? The station had 73 residents. No armaments? They had not needed manufactured armaments. They had the station, and they had months of preparation, and they had the complete working knowledge of every surface and junction and access panel in their home. No tactical training? Correct. Faye had no tactical training. What Faye had was the decision, made long before I walked through the airlock, that she was not leaving, and the months of preparation time in which she had converted that decision into a physical reality built into the walls of the station itself. No defensive capacity? I left 5 operatives on that station. I am going to give command something in this account that I did not give in the first debrief session, which is the full shape of what I understood from the 14 hours of silence in the transport medical bay, because the first session was about what happened, and this session needs to be about what it means. What I understood was this: the intelligence file had been built to find military threats, because military threats are what the compact prepares for and what our operational doctrine is designed to address. The intelligence process looks for armaments, for military designations, for tactical training in the personnel files, for evidence of fortification and defensive infrastructure. It is a very good process for finding those things. Waypoint 11 did not have those things. What Waypoint 11 had was people who had been building a home for years at the edge of a transit corridor, at the outer limit of where human communities had been established in the sector, in a place that was commercially marginal and logistically inconvenient and apparently not worth much to anyone except the people who had chosen to make it theirs. People who had, at some point in the building of that home, understood that the home they were building was the kind of home that might one day need to be defended, not by a military force because they did not have one, but by the people in it, using the only thing they had, which was knowing it completely. The communications modification had been built months before our approach vector was filed. Faye had known every maintenance conduit in the station at the level of physical memory. Brent had rehearsed his silence before we ever asked a question. Len had made his offer and knew what my answer would be before I gave it. They had been preparing since before we came, not because they had intelligence about our specific mission, because they had history about missions like it. That is the thing the intelligence file was not built to find. The compact wanted the debrief to begin at hour 14. My senior commander Drev asked me for a tactical assessment of the defensive capability of the station, identification of the key coordination personnel for future targeting, structural modifications that could be eliminated before a second approach, and a revised force composition recommendation for a successful designation acquisition. I gave him the numbers: contact duration, operative loss sequence, modification catalog from Delia's scans before we lost her, power consumption patterns, everything quantifiable. He pressed me on the force composition recommendation. I told him I did not have one. He told me to look again at the data. I told him I had looked at the data for 14 hours, and the force composition question was not the question the data was answering. He asked me what question the data was answering. I told him the data was answering a question the tactical framework did not have a column for. There was a second session. A senior intelligence analyst attended and asked better questions. Not what the humans did, but what I assessed as the motivating factor for the level of resistance we encountered, given that the population was non-military and the station had no strategic value to the individuals defending it. No strategic value to the individuals defending it. I looked at that phrase for a moment, and then I told her it had all the strategic value in the world to the individuals defending it. It was where they lived. It was where they had lived for years. It was where the children attended school in a room with their drawings on the wall, and where Faye had been maintaining the station's systems for long enough that she knew exactly how to turn the maintenance conduits into a tactical advantage without a single day of tactical training. It was where Brent sat in a corridor and answered 15 questions with silence, because he had decided to, and the deciding had been done so completely and so far in advance that no question I could have asked would have found a gap in it. She asked, "What is the threat assessment revision?" I gave it to her, and I am giving it here, because it is the most important thing in this account, and I want command to have it in direct language rather than filed in a column. The threat assessment for Waypoint 11 read, "Minimal, civilian, non-military, no defensive capacity." The threat assessment should read, "A community that has decided it is home." That is not a tactical rating. I know it is not a tactical rating, but it is the only accurate description of what those 73 people produced on that station, and it is the only description that explains how a maintenance worker with machine oil on her hands and no tactical training removed 6 Arvith operatives from a mission they had every quantitative advantage to complete. She had decided. That is the full explanation. She had decided that the station was hers, and she was not leaving, and she had used every month of the preparation time to make that decision real in the physical world, and when we arrived, the decision was already finished. It was not a decision she was making in the moment of contact. It was a decision she was expressing. I watched Cora treat a wounded person in a corridor where the contact had ended less than 5 minutes before. I walked past her. She looked up at me and there was nothing in her face that asked me for anything. She had already decided what she was going to do, and she was doing it. Sit in the corridor, treat the person in front of her, return to the thing that mattered, which was the person in front of her, who was hers. I do not know if that person survived. I have looked for the information, and I have not found it, and I am not sure I will. What I know is that she was still in that corridor when I passed, still there, still treating, still in a station that 5 Arveth operatives had tried to remove her from and had not managed to, because removing a person from a place they have decided is home requires removing the decision, and you cannot remove a decision with equipment. My recommendation to the compact is this: do not send another team to Waypoint 11. Not because the math does not eventually favor a successful designation acquisition. With sufficient force and sufficient operational commitment, the math always eventually comes out. The station has 73 residents, not an army. A large enough force applied with sufficient tactical preparation will achieve the mission objective. That is true, and it is not my recommendation. My recommendation is to not send another team because of what it will cost to do it. Not in operatives or transport time or equipment. In something that I have been trying to find a column for since I sat in the transport medical bay watching the station drop off the screen. Len offered me a way out of that station. 3 of us, through the docking bay, clean exit, no pursuit. He offered it because he could see the tactical math as well as I could, and he was willing to let us go rather than spend more of his people finishing what our entry had started. He was not being merciful. He was being practical, in the specific practical way of someone who has already lost enough and does not want to lose more. I could not take the offer, not because the math told me to refuse it. The math told me to take it. I refused it because the mission was the mission, and I did not have a provision inside myself for any other answer, and I have spent 14 cycles since then asking myself what that says about me and what it says about them. Because they had the same provision I had. The same inability to accept a different answer, the same prior decision made before the situation arrived, held so completely that the situation arriving did not revise it. The difference is that their decision was about a place they loved. Mine was about a column in a mission brief. I am not making a moral argument to command. I want to be clear about that. I am not arguing that the compact's approach to designation acquisition requires philosophical revision. I am giving command the most accurate tactical intelligence I have from a mission that eliminated 5 of the 6 operatives assigned to it, produced none of the mission objectives, and left a commercial transit station in human hands with its residents intact and its systems running and its children's drawings still on the walls where they had been put. The intelligence that produced this outcome described non-military civilians with no defensive capacity. The intelligence was wrong. I cannot tell you what the correct column is. I cannot give you a number for what 73 people who have decided a place is home are worth in tactical terms, because the number changes depending on how long they have had to prepare and how much they love the place, and neither of those variables is something our assessment framework is currently built to measure. What I can tell you is the number I have. 6 went in, 1 came out, and the station is still theirs. I have nothing else to give this debrief. I have given command the operational report, the intelligence corrections, the structural modification catalog, and everything in this account. I have given command 11 years of field operation and 0 prior losses, and a mission framework that was sufficient for every prior mission I was assigned to. On Waypoint 11, the mission framework was not sufficient. Not because the framework is wrong, because the framework was built around a specific understanding of what drives resistance, and the people in that station were driven by something the framework does not model. They were not fighting to win. They were not fighting to hold a strategic position. They were not even fighting because they had been trained to. They were fighting because it was Tuesday morning and that was where they lived, and they were not leaving. I do not have a column for Tuesday morning. I do not have a column for machine oil on someone's hands and a decision made months ago in the quiet of a maintenance corridor. I do not have a column for children's drawings left on a wall. If command can build those columns, I recommend building them before the next mission. If command cannot build them, I recommend not sending the next team without telling them exactly what those columns contain, so that the operative standing at a junction with a docking bay to the left and a mission objective to the right has more information than I had. More information than the intelligence file gave me. More than 11 pages, and more than a threat designation that read minimal, civilian, non-military, no defensive capacity. Something that reads closer to a community that decided. And if the compact is going to continue operating in this transit corridor, and if there are more communities like Waypoint 11 along these transit lanes, which I assess as highly likely given that the pattern of a community that has been building a home long enough to prepare for its defense is not a pattern that occurs at one station and nowhere else, then the assessment framework needs a new column before the next mission leaves. Not a column for military strength or armament capacity or trained personnel numbers. A column for how long they have been there. A column for whether there are children's drawings on the walls. A column for the thing that tells you whether the people in an installation are occupying it or whether they are home. Because those are different assessments and they require different approaches, and sending a tactical team with a designation acquisition brief into a place where people are home is not the same mission as the one the brief describes, and the difference is what cost me 5 people in one mission after 11 years of 0 losses. I am done with this account. What I have given command is the operational report, the intelligence corrections, the modification catalog from Delia's scans, the personnel assessments, the full timeline, and this testimony. I have given everything I have. What I have not been able to give, and what I suspect no field report will ever be able to give in the format that command requires, is the thing that actually happened on that station, the specific quality of a place that has been decided into permanence, the particular expression on Len's face when he said, "I know," the way Faye stood outside that door, not with heroism and not with bravado, just with the complete settled quality of someone doing the obvious thing. The way Cora did not look up, and then looked up, and then looked back down. I have nothing more. Let me correct that. I have one more thing, which is the hardest thing in this account to put into language that a tactical debrief can receive, and I am going to try anyway, because I have been trying to say it since the transport left Waypoint 11's scan range, and this is the account where it either gets said or it does not get said. What I carry from that station is not the operational failure. Operational failures are documentable. They have causes and corrections and lessons learned columns. The operational failure of Waypoint 11 has all of those, and they are in the report. What I carry is the moment in the second-level corridor, standing in front of the schoolroom door, when I understood what kind of place I was inside. When I understood that the 14 drawings I could see from the doorway represented a specific child or children who had put them there in the expectation that they would remain, and who, when the airlock alert sounded on the morning we arrived, had been somewhere in this station with the people who were theirs, in the home that was theirs, in the presence of the decision that had already been made. The drawing that I remember most clearly is one I only had a partial view of from the doorway. A transit ship coming into dock. Simple shapes. Not technically accurate, but recognizable in the particular way of a drawing, made by someone who has watched ships come into dock enough times that the shape has become familiar. The ship was coming toward the station. The station was at the edge of the frame. The station was home. The ship was arriving. Someone had drawn it with the ease of drawing something ordinary. I do not know what I was supposed to do with that. I do not know what a tactical framework is supposed to do with that. I know that I stood in the corridor looking at it for approximately 4 seconds before Delia said, "Hub entry in 40 meters," and I came back to the work. And I know that the 4 seconds have not ended in the cycles since. I gave command the operational report. I gave command the intelligence corrections and the structural modification catalog and the personnel assessments and everything quantifiable. I gave this testimony. I have not given command the drawing of the ship. I am giving it now. The station is still theirs. The ship is still in the drawing. The drawing is still on the wall. And somewhere in that station, Len is solving practical problems in the settled way of someone who offered the fair terms, and was told "I know," and said "I know" back, and went on with the work of maintaining the home he has decided is his. I do not have a column for this. I am not sure any column would hold it. That is all I have. 6 went in. 1 came out. The drawings are still on the wall, logged and noted, and I am done.